Welcome to our Health Tech Leaders webinar on transforming and reimagining healthcare, part of Health Tech Leaders Virtual. My name is Russ Johannes, and I have the honor of moderating this discussion today with an incredible group of panelists who represent a diverse and important set of experiences, interests, perspectives across the global healthcare ecosystem. Before we introduce them, I'd just like to set the stage maybe a little bit for the topic of our discussion today. Over the past decade, there's been significant investments in and advancements in health tech innovation globally. Health tech innovation has been getting even more attention of late as the global pandemic of COVID-19 has really served as a forcing function for the acceleration and adoption of new ways to deliver care, to improve access, to develop therapies, to financially support the somewhat fragmented and maybe even fragile health ecosystem, and really to support improved health outcomes in this interesting time. But this has also kind of served to shine a bright light on some of the systemic obstacles that still remain in front of our progress on innovation. Some of these obstacles are related to the alignment of incentives across the system. Some are around barriers for collaboration, new and changing reimbursement mechanisms, a changing regulatory environment, and several others. I'm happy to say that we've got a very distinguished panel of innovation leaders with us today to kind of unpack these issues and discuss the state of innovation today and where it's leading in the future. Our panel represents a unique combination of experience and perspective from across the breadth of the healthcare ecosystem, including global perspectives on healthcare delivery, medical technology, life sciences, et cetera, in healthcare innovation. So I'm going to have each panelist introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their organization, their experience, and their perspective. Maybe to kick it off, I'll give you a little more of my background, because in addition to being the moderator of the panel, I'm also the Chief Executive Officer of Gluco, which is the largest diabetes connected care platform in the world. We've got the only universal device agnostic diabetes remote care and data management solution, which has been deployed globally. We're in 26 countries and 15 languages. And we help connect people with diabetes with their care teams, and we unlock the power of the data for the entire diabetes ecosystem, enabling highly personalized treatment decision support, as well as population health analytics and clinical research as well. And so now to introduce our panel, I'll let them introduce themselves. Maybe Jennifer, we'll start with you.
Sure, thanks a lot, Russ. So hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Esposito. I'm the Vice President of the Health Business at Magic Leap. Magic Leap is a spatial computing company. We're working on platforms and capabilities that are going to enable a wide range of use cases in healthcare, in health and wellness and fitness and sports. And, you know, from my entire career perspective, I've always been working right along the lines of high tech and healthcare. So I started my career at GE Healthcare as a Six Sigma black belt, and spent a lot of that time also in the interventional radiology and cardiology business. And then prior to joining Magic Leap, I spent a little bit over 4 years at Intel, where I led the health and life sciences team. So really excited in general about how technology can really help accelerate a lot of the transformation that is needed in healthcare. And I think what we've all seen recently with COVID is really an acceleration of that transformation and a more of a widespread acceptance of technology and how it can benefit both patients and care providers. So looking forward to the conversation here. Thanks, Russ.
Thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate that. Leila, why don't you go next?
Sure, thanks, Russ. So I'm Leila Sheppard. I'm Director of Strategy at NHS Digital. And for those that don't know, NHS Digital is the National Information and Technology Partner to the health and care system in England. And so what that means is our mission is to improve lives through data and technology. And we do that by building products and services for the health and care system, which includes things like APIs and shared resources to enable the health tech sector. And we run and maintain critical national infrastructure at high availability and security. And finally, we gather and curate and disseminate data for management information and research. Now, I'm a relative newcomer to the public sector. I joined NHS Digital at the height of COVID in April of this year. And prior to that, I was a consultant in the digital practice at McKinsey & Company, where I focused exclusively on healthcare innovation across the private and public sector, from wearable strategies to advanced analytics. So I hope to bring some some thoughts from that part of my world. And then prior to that, for 7 years, I was Chief Technology Officer at DNA Electronics, which is a diagnostics company now operating in the UK and US. And during that time, we built and scaled technology for DNA detection at point of care and licensed it out for sequencing. So having done that, I have some perspectives on navigating the challenges of product market fit, pivoting, and complex stakeholder environments. So great to be here today.
Great. Thanks, Leila. You just tell us which hat you're wearing when you're answering a question. Okay? Which of those? Jeroen, why don't you give an introduction of yourself as well?
Yeah, thanks, Russ. I'm leading strategy and innovation for Philips and guiding the company towards becoming a digital health tech player. So strategy includes M&A, venturing, and strategic partnering, because we believe that this is an ecosystem play. And innovation ranges from research to clinical innovation, experience innovation, platforms, and sustainability, or rather regenerative systems. And you know, what motivated me, Russ, is the fact that my daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And I was stunned by the lack of, you know, real care coordination, deep insights in the patients. And a lot of what you're doing with Gluco is kind of close to my heart. And it motivated me to, you know, become part of Philips and take the company towards a world where care is personal, precise, is guided, where access is dramatically improved from what we see today, and way better, you know, managed and delivered. So that's what we set out to do: deliver on the quadruple aim: better outcomes, better experience for patients, better experience for professionals, and way more efficient system.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I would venture to say, and it's certainly been my experience, that most people who are spending their time and effort in healthcare, especially in the areas of innovation and strategy, we all have a passion for this space because it has a real personal impact on people's lives at the end of the day, which kind of raises the stakes a little bit for the whole conversation on innovation, because it's not like we can afford to slow down or step back. We always need to be advancing the ball. And so I think that's a good context for the conversation today. So thank you all for that introduction. Let's jump right in. You know, healthcare and health tech innovation has been happening for a long time. Certainly there's, you know, a very unique lens on it right now with the COVID-19 kind of pandemic. But what do you all think about what the specifics of the COVID-19 pandemic have taught us about the types of digital health tech innovation that we need to be focusing on, or the way that the healthcare system has sort of adopted these new innovations in light of something like a COVID-19 pressing us? Leila, you want to kick us off on that?
Sure, happy to. And you know, so from an NHS perspective, it's really taught us, first of all, the importance of digital channels, right? During the pandemic, the digital channels that we run, nhs.uk, NHS app, have become the digital front door used by millions of citizens to check their symptoms, provide electronic triage to determine whether or not they needed in-person care, and ensure that they could access the latest information and services from home. The second has been remote care, a huge advance in sort of telehealth, video consultations that were rolled out in a matter of weeks, things that would have taken years with traditional health tech processes. And coupled with that, remote care through video consultations, etc., is also the access to patient information and ensuring that the clinicians can access what they need to at the right time remotely. So for me, it's really four things, like digital channels, electronic triage, remote care, and access to data, both at the person level and at the system level. And those have been the four big enablers for our system. In addition to that, what it's also shown us is what it takes to get things done at pace. And so some of this stuff that I'm talking about was delivered centrally, some of it was delivered by the market. And so we've needed extremely close and effective collaboration across the system, across our central bodies, across the commercial sector, to combine policy agility with technical delivery and commercial agility, because none of this can happen without all those three things working together. So there's part of it is about ways of working and collaboration, and part of it is having that single overriding purpose that's narrowed the space that we need to solve for, and really solve a more specific set of needs very well addressed by digital.
Jeroen or Jennifer, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I want to take that a little further, because clearly, Leila, this is what we've seen as well around the globe. So virtual was a given. That was the only way you could still get in touch with your doctor. And you know, when you do something for 3-4 months, you start changing behavior. So it will stick. It will definitely stick, but it's just a transaction. So what's more important, I believe, is that we start looking at getting that longitudinal view of the patient, because you may have COVID, but the way COVID will develop is also dependent on your comorbidities, and we've seen that. And then as you get admitted to acute care, how do you know that the frontline staff has insight in the latest protocols? How can you relieve them from the tremendous pressure? So what we've seen as well is what's very successful in the US is remote ICU support. So you have these command centers, if you will, that really support the frontline staff. So data gets streamed, telemetry, cameras are installed, and actually, you know, people sitting behind the screens can say, hey, this patient is deteriorating rapidly, so you have to change the drip, or, you know, you have to reconfigure the ventilator. And guess what? This patient is stabilized, so we can take the person out of the ICU right now. And we've seen tremendous insights also coming. If you connect now, let's say what we're doing in the US, by the way, is we connected 200 ICUs from the Veterans Administration, because they want to create a network. They want to learn from insights in each of these. So you talked about data, basically not just individual data that's more longitudinal, but also that can be aggregated so that you can create the best protocols that people can then use in their daily care. And then the last thing, which I believe is hugely important, which we have seen as well, you know, what's the role of the hospital? Is the hospital a place where you do very complex and very acute care? Then, okay, maybe we should do much more in clinics and in the home. And we've seen that because people didn't dare to go to the hospital. We've seen elective procedures go down like crazy. But if we had a clinic where you now could go and, you know, still do an X-ray or do a blood test or do another test or do even a cardiovascular procedure, I think that would have changed the way the healthcare system could deal with this as well. So there are a lot of pointers to how we can build in not only efficiency in the system, because now it's way easier to prioritize demand and virtualize supply. Also the location where we're providing that care can change. So we see some pointers of, I would say, dramatic changes in the way healthcare is being organized. And it's not just in the UK or the US. We see people in China talking about it, in India, everywhere people are rethinking how they deliver care.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Jeroen, especially when you talk about that kind of physical location piece, because obviously if you think back historically, you know, healthcare has always been a local business. Access to care historically was all about what are the local resources that you can actually get to in your physical community. And now technology's really enabled all kinds of new delivery models that really break down those traditional access restrictions in really interesting ways. And as we look at the world today and moving forward, I mean, what do you see as the most promising trends or approaches to improving access, and where do you think this is ultimately going? I know Jennifer at Magic Leap, you guys are doing some really interesting things in this area. What's your thought on that kind of expansion of the concept of access?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think it's brought up both the localization of care as well as this ability to expand people's access to you know, globally, essentially, right? If that's what's required. And so, you know, as you move care outside of the hospital and use technology to enable care to be delivered anywhere, you also, I think, get the benefit of the fact that patients are probably going to be more likely to engage in their care in a real-time way, whether they're sick or not, versus I think what we've tend to focus on is usually only the reactive modes, right? A person's already sick, they already have a chronic condition, and how do you manage that? So I think the shift is bringing technology into people's homes or in their communities in ways that enable them to get more engaged and own sort of some of the responsibility and activity around their own care. And then subsequent to that, I think there is this ability to also leverage technology to access the expertise. So even if you are, you're local and you're primarily getting most of your care locally, if you do have a serious condition, a rare condition, you will be able to be access experts from around the world. And I think you're going to be able to do that in ways that, go beyond just teleconferencing and voice. You're really going to be able to share in the experience. A lot of what we work on at Magic Leap is around merging the digital and the physical worlds. And so a lot of times that means that we're focused on sharing digital content, particularly in 3D. So that can mean different ways of sharing radiological images. It can also mean different ways of communicating and visualizing each other that I think will enhance people's experiences as they go forward. So kind of going beyond the 2D experience that we're all going through now and taking advantage of. I think which also points out the fact that a lot of what we've seen recently really proves the point that the technology is essentially ready, right? And I think that's what's really interesting about this conversation about access. There's really not a lot holding us back at this point from really going forward. And unfortunately, an event like COVID really had to sort of give everybody the taste of that capability and that reality.
Mm-hmm.
I have an interesting example of access. So, if you look at cancer care, about probably between 80 and 90% of all cancer care takes place in non-specialist centers. So, but cancer care is, cancer is a very complex disease, and there are a lot of modalities that come into play when you diagnose it. So you have images, which can be a CT scan, can be ultrasound, can be an MR. You have pathology, which can be, tissue and liquid biopsy, and now genomics, and you can look at biomarkers in blood on the image, etc. And then you have a huge array of therapies, obviously surgery, ablation, radiation, immunotherapy, chemotherapy, different doses, different combinations. So it's almost impossible to get it fully right. So what we've done is we started working with Dana Farber and also MD Anderson and say, you guys are the specialists, and you developed all these very sophisticated care pathways. What if we can help you codify it and then make it available to the thousands of hospitals that want to have access to basically the best care pathways? And we're doing some similar in cardiovascular care. The standard care is fine, but what if you're hitting a very complex issue? And can you then tap into those pathways? And then also on top of that, virtualize the support. So, you have a rare form of cancer, and now, the MD Anderson specialist, or here in Europe, the Martina Hospital, who are prostate, specialists, can come in online and help you in the tumor board or the patient engagement. And to me, that's very promising, because it allows you to get world-class care, even in the hands of people that may not yet be world-class or never will be world-class. Similar to the example I gave with the ICU, you may have the best intensivist. Instead of managing 50 beds, suddenly they're available to manage 5,000 beds and use their super expertise to help and guide. So I think that's the big change. That's the big change in not just access, but providing quality through that access.
Sure. Well, it's interesting because, increasing access to care, that's not a new problem. And we all know that, healthcare has been historically incredibly slow to adopt innovation, in particular technological innovation. And what you've described, Jeroen, from Philip's perspective, that's been going on for a while. That was not a COVID-19 inspired approach. That's been going on systemically. But we do see now this example of the pandemic hitting, and in other areas of access like telehealth and remote care management and things, which many of us, like myself, have been pushing in the market for years now, very much, Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill, with low adoption, even though it makes perfect sense. Now you have something like a global pandemic, which creates this massive forcing function, which forces the adoption overnight. And guess what? Like you started, I think, Jeroen, in your comments originally, people, both healthcare providers and patients, are now seeing that, adoption makes sense. It's helpful. It's necessary in this environment. And you know what? Over time, we all believe it's going to stay at a new baseline normal, because it's proven it's valuable, but it's not a new concept. So as you think about the pace of future healthcare innovation, has this pandemic changed the way that might happen? Have we unlocked some things? Are we going to require some of these seismic shifts to continue to advance to the next stage of innovation going forward? What do you guys think about that?
I think it's hard. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Leila, why don't you go?
Yeah, Russ, I'm happy to speak to this one. I mean, COVID showed us the art of the possible, right? And nobody wants to go back. As a system, we're hungry to keep the pace and the mindset and the collaboration that COVID unblocked, and to re-baseline our plans for the future. And in a way, it's, as you say, adoption was always a challenge, but now that tech has been adopted, now that we know that we can deliver it both centrally and with health tech innovators, really it's about recalibrating our appetite and resetting plans for what we do.
Yeah, and I think obviously it took some outside force to change the system, and that's clear. We've all been pushing this rock up the hill, and hope not to be crushed under it. So, but still, if you look at it honestly, we did a lot of stuff because we could. It was there. The technology was there. We just needed conditions to deploy it, and guess what? It works. It's great. People love it. But I think there is a bigger issue. Are we now really using this to create a systemic change? If you look at the way we're handling COVID, I think it's still a little bit shameful, to be honest. The collaboration is not as great as we hoped. If I'm from Europe, I look around in Europe, responses are not coordinated, insights are not really, shared. There is no collective drive towards insights and solutions, and it's still fragmented as always, which kind of makes me believe, hey guys, wake up, this is the moment. Healthcare requires collaboration. Your model of brick and mortar in the high street equivalent, we all know that model is gone. And yeah, you still need brick and mortar, but really use it for the real complex stuff, and complement it with the virtual, because supply and demand is not in balance right now. So, and the NHS is a good example. I think it's been highly decentralized, and now I said that's fine as long as you now bring it together, share insights, share protocols, find common ways to deal with a pandemic, and hopefully that's the outcome in the next couple of months. As you say, Jeroen, it has been highly decentralized, but COVID has necessitated some of that recentralization, right? So one of the things we did in the UK that I don't believe any other country did is to identify and protect our vulnerable citizens. So we gathered national data to identify who those people are from local organizations, and curated it and fed that back. Again, it's forced us to take the data we have around triage platforms, combine it with to figure out potential COVID cases, combine it with test data, and use that data to monitor progression of the disease across the country. And of course, it's been a sort of iterative learning experience, but increasingly
that data comes to the center and then goes back to the directors of local public health that need it to control. So as you say, it's a system that well, all health systems at their start are really quite fragmented. COVID has forced us together in a national effort that then comes to the center, reduces some of that fragmentation. We're still on a journey, and then redistributes it to the local organizations that need it. And I think that's definitely one of the very positive influences we're seeing from COVID.
Yeah, I really like, that always surprised me when I always ask a CEO of a hospital, tell me about your patient population. And they immediately start talking about, okay, I have 50 ICU beds, I have so many inpatients in cardiology. I said, no. What's the population you're responsible for? How does it break down? What are the risk groups? What are the correct characteristics of those risk groups? And are you proactively reaching out and say, okay, maybe we should have a program for elderly people with 4 or 5 chronic diseases living at home? So, and there are very few people that do that. So what you tell me is kind of a first step to that stratification, and then making sure that you organize around that stratification. You start with the most frail and at-risk people, and you support them. So that should become a systemic part of any healthcare system, from my perspective.
Absolutely.
For sure. Even outside of kind of the impacts of COVID on innovation, even outside of healthcare, a lot of industries are looking to technology innovation to streamline interactions, create efficiency. And in healthcare, at one extreme end of that spectrum, technology enablement really could drive us down a path of unintended consequence, which disintermediates the patient and the healthcare provider, right? You see it all the time, right? We're finding ways to extend physicians and care teams. We're finding ways to use non-human interactions and interventions to extend, people and enable people to make changes in their healthcare, et cetera. But where do you guys see the balance that needs to be struck here, right? At the end of the day, healthcare is delivered typically between a patient and a provider, and it's all great to drive efficiency, but is there a risk of disintermediation here? And frankly, is that okay? Is that going to be advancing us? I know, Jennifer, a lot of the things you guys are doing at Magic Leap, I wouldn't put in the bucket of disintermediation. I think in many ways it's about bringing them together, but you can see there are other technologies out there that do kind of go the other direction. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's very much about sort of breaking those boundaries that the digital currently puts in the world, right? The screen in front of somebody's face, or you're always looking down at something. So this ability to engage with people in a 3D co-present way really makes a difference in that. So I think that's one thing, right? When the experience has to be face-to-face, you're not going to be limited to looking at 2D monitors, right? And forcing to look down, up, wherever, and not really feeling like you're focused on the person that you're talking to. But I think the other thing that's important is that technology is actually going to give patients more opportunities to actually interact with care, right? They don't have to wait for the office visit that they might do once a year. I think technology brings a convenience factor to the patient that I think we can't overlook. And as a result, I really think that that's going to cause people, and I think I said this earlier, right? People are going to become more engaged. And so I think in the long run, that's really going to be one of the big benefits we see here. It's not just about access in the sense that you can see a provider anywhere. It's access in the sense that care that you might need can happen anywhere. And as a patient, it could be these small little things along the way that happen that don't have to pile up into one big thing when you go to an office visit. So I think that's the sort of, in my mind, I see a lot of positive in it. Obviously, you have to do it the right way. But I also think that, in the same, thought, we focus, I think, particularly with COVID around the telehealth experience. I think a lot of the stuff that's behind the scenes that potentially is already driving it or has the potential to really make it something different are all of these other technologies that are sort of converging right now at the same time, right? We've been talking about AI in healthcare for a long time. That's a really important way to leverage these different streams of data that to date really haven't been utilized to gain many insights that can facilitate triaging and being more proactive. IoT and sensors at the edge that can give more continuous information about what's going on with the patient, and things like spatial computing, where obviously where I'm playing, and the capability of the cloud and the network really to enable these experiences to happen. So I think that's the other thing to keep in mind. It is really very much an interesting point in time, because all of these things are starting to become more mainstream and integrated with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, pulling the thread through some of these conversations we're having here around collaboration and access, and now as you bring into that the conversation around data, which by many respects is kind of the fuel for healthcare innovation in a lot of ways, it does bring up the real increased focus on the need for interoperability, right? And that continues to be a very hot topic in healthcare. The interoperability of data standards, et cetera, the interoperability of technologies and services to be able to share data across this vast, kind of very fragmented system that we operate under. Where do you all see the greatest value proposition for interoperability in terms of impact on the system? And what do you think it's going to take for us to truly get there? Because we've talked about it for a long time, but there's misaligned interests, other things that are causing us not to completely get there. And frankly, in some markets, there are still holdouts, I think, who do not necessarily buy into the concept of interoperability, because in some cases, from a business perspective, it reduces your differentiation, right? So what do you guys think about the kind of the focus of interoperability in space?
I think you should start with the patient, and again, I look at my daughter, and she's engaging with obviously an internist that's helping her with her insulin and glucose, a dermatologist, because as you well know, there's skin problems, there may be kidney problems, but she also has a lot of anxiety issues, like many young women with type 1, and so we talk about care teams. I think the first thing we should really do is truly enable a care team, and that care team may be these disciplines, but also maybe her partner with her boyfriend she lives with. I always believe that my wife knows more about my daughter than any doctor, and it's highly relevant to her care pathway. But I think that applies to other complex diseases as well. So as we ground ourselves in these collective, both measurements, as well as observations, as well as trends, that could then trigger the right intervention. And the intervention may be, your parents living at home, elderly. It may be prompting a neighbor to look in, or sending a nurse to the home. And that's where the combination, I believe, between human care and digital care comes together. But it's all grounded in a holistic view of that patient that people contribute to. So as long as we don't align the interests into better outcomes for these patients, we will have, interoperability problems, which are not necessarily technology problems.
I agree with you, Jeroen. It's hugely important. And I mean, too often in healthcare systems, the patient themselves, or as you reference, their parent or their carer is the interoperability that knows all the relevant information and has to carry it from place to place.
And the care coordinator, and the care data aggregator and care coordinator.
Exactly. Right. Too often that's the case, right? And interoperability is fundamental to safe and effective care, right? Clinicians need to be able to see that information, and it can't be just a case of whether or not somebody remembered to tell them the right thing and whether or not they could access the right system. So safety and efficacy is for me like one of the number one value propositions. Second is time and productivity. Again, we don't want our clinicians spending time logging into different systems to find out all the right information, or we'll still have one system but need to double click on multiple attachments to find out what to sniff around for the right information.
Or ask for a fax to be sent. I heard that the NHS is still one of the biggest procurer of fax machines.
That's statistic. Yeah, that's still been, we've replaced it with mail, but secure mail. But yes, I mean, a long way to go. There's a difference between electronic documents and structured information, and we're on a journey to structured information, of course, and the tech to do that exists. But as you say, Jeroen, there's a bunch of other non-tech barriers in there. And then the final piece of interrupt for me is that, and this comes probably from my previous experience as a consultant, is that, you know, to get those, you know, truly joined up experiences for the citizens and the patients alike, you've got to knit together these point solutions. So we can have an app for disease management and prevention, we can have an app for drug management, we can have this, but unless that, exactly, but unless you string together that chain of pearls with true interoperability, and both to commercial systems and the central systems that are run, that's not a joined up experience, and we have to solve.
Yeah. Let's shift focus a little bit here. I'll give you a little perspective. My company's focused in the chronic condition management space, diabetes specifically, and that's an area where there has been a significant amount of investment in terms of innovation in technologies and therapies and approaches. And yet, by many measures, the underlying problem continues to get worse and not better. Let's talk for a minute about the big problems that are still out there to solve in healthcare, whether that's from a disease perspective, a delivery perspective, cost, engagement, whatever. As you guys reflect on how you play in the markets today, you know, where do you see the biggest issues to tackle globally from a healthcare perspective? Do you see any other specific areas that seem to be consistently difficult to crack the code on? And what are the highest value targets that we should be pointing this innovation effort and investment at? You guys have a thought on that?
Well, I believe that systems organize themselves around how they're being paid. So, you know, if the incentives in the system are not outcomes for patients, but, you know, the number of procedures or consults or tests, then that's what people do. And you have then to surround that with a lot of rules around safety and quality and necessity, etc. So you create a very, very complex system. While you could have created a simpler system, which we now can do because we can measure much more, we can track much more, that's really focused around outcomes. And that an outcome you can do multiple levels. You can say, okay, I go in to get a stent and I want that procedure to go right. I don't want to go back. I don't want any infections. I want to be out there and do sports. That can be an outcome. Or in chronic disease, it can be, you know, better control over your disease, less complications, less visits to the hospital, less readmission. And if we give people the incentives and we pay them that way, and in the US they're starting that with Medicare Advantage, as you're well aware, but it's a slow process because it's almost a flip from where a lot of the providers coming from. And it means you have to look at, then you have to understand who's your population, what are the risks, what services, you know, what's beyond the clinical stuff that drives outcomes, how can I influence that, how can I make sure that I measure myself against others, and how can I learn every day, how can I create closed loops between my diagnosis, my therapy, and my outcome, and that's a lot of work, and but you know, you can only get there if you start planting the incentives in the right place.
I think, you know, we talked a little bit ago about the value of data in all of this. And I think, you know, to your point, as we are able to access the existing digital data that's out there, will be, you know, not only do you measure outcomes to drive incentives, but you'll actually understand why the outcome was the outcome. And I think that's one of the struggles we've had all along here. I mean, you can measure a good outcome, but you can't necessarily tell the next doctor who's going to have that same experience why the prior doctor was so successful. And that's really what I think excites me a lot about where we are today from a technology perspective, because it's not going to necessarily, I mean, obviously there's much art in what we're talking about here, but there's also a lot of objective information that can be leveraged to make sure that everybody can be trained properly, that data becomes sort of a dynamic database that continuously gets updated with all of the future experiences of other patients. So that not only informs sort of that more population or holistic look, but I think it also gets at the patient level to that very personalized individual experience. So you can really pinpoint what's necessary for them. And I think that's going to drive both incentives on both sides, right? For the providers and also for the patients themselves.
So what you're saying is now we should create these feedback loops and keep learning, keep fine tuning. And we could never do that, to be honest, and we can. And that would be a huge change, because now we can learn from every patient, every diagnosis, every treatment, and we can then personalize it, aggregate it. So I think that holds the key to way better outcome.
Yeah.
100% agree. You know, I would have also said if we can navigate those hurdles, you know, harnessing the power of data is absolutely the thing that can unlock the most in healthcare for the reasons you've said. And what makes me so excited about what we've seen in COVID is that there's been an appetite to do that. And the green shoots are there now. So, you know, the stuff that's been done in terms of, I described earlier around the national data sharing for shielding of patients, that gets the next generation of that is a more sophisticated algorithm based on evidence that we're seeing now from COVID. We're already doing that. And the next generation of that is a reusable risk stratification platform for all of the conditions you're talking about. Not only that, but we've also shown the power of data for research and again, unlock that. For example, with the recovery trials, you know, to go from data about a patient to a drug approved within a week. It's really shown the value of what we can do, and I hope unblocks the future.
Yeah, evidence will change, and it's no longer just a clinical trial. There will be a lot of real world evidence, and the more contextual the data, probably the more you see and the more you can pinpoint and identify risk and mitigation.
Absolutely. We're getting close to the end of our time here, and maybe to put a wrapper on this really interesting conversation, maybe each of you could share a couple of words from your own perspective on where you think healthcare innovation is headed in the next, pick a time, 10 years, and what kind of collaborations, as we've been discussing, and realignments in the system will be most important to get to a successful outcome. And you get extra credit points if your response leaves us all with a whole bunch of hope for the future. So why don't we take that tact? And maybe Jennifer, let's start with you.
Yeah, I hope it's all hopeful, right? I'm super hopeful. That's why I really, you know, that's why I'm passionate about working, you know, sort of at this mix between health and tech. You know, I think what I'll say, I think is somewhat repetitive to what I already said, but for me, this is really about these integrated data streams that include both the patient and all of the stuff that goes on around them, including, you know, their environment and all of this other information that we know contributes to truly understanding, you know, a person's health and their future and what needs to happen for them. And so, you know, I think that this idea that we talked about with respect to sort of data being the real driving force here and leveraging it in the right way is going to lead to this more continuous health and wellness focus at the patient level that people can sort of embrace on their own. And then that becomes the right way to trigger more proactively the engagements with the health system so that everything isn't a reactive and acute event. And it becomes this lifelong sort of truly longitudinal experience that I think we all get used to as patients and people in our daily lives. And so I think that's going to make it a lot easier because I think that our providers and the payers are going to have a lot more information at their disposal to deliver the right treatments to people at the right time and intervene early before these things sort of get out of hand. So that's where I see us going in the, you know, the 5 to 10 year range. And it really does mean that we're leveraging telehealth, we're leveraging AI, spatial computing, IoT, all of the computing power that is sort of front and center right now and capable of enabling some of these things.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks.
Jeroen, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, I want to continue on that because I think ultimately it has to lead to something, and it has to lead to us having better control over our own health, better understanding what drives health, but also how we can better control disease like type 1 diabetes or heart failure. And that's grounded then in that very precise dynamic view of your own health, which is supported and guarded by a proactive health system. And that can mean that if it's really complex, that health system will give you access to the best specialists in the world. And I think if we can get there, I think it will make a big difference on the outcomes. It will make a big difference also on the cost to deliver it, because a lot of this will be virtual and it will only be personal when it's really necessary to hang out with a person that can give you the empathy and the trust to get there.
Great. Thank you, Jeroen. Leila, you get the last word on the subject. Go for it.
Well, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with particularly the latter part of what Jeroen said, and that health system that moves away from a place where digital is an add-on and an enabler to a place where actually digital allows you to reimagine how you deliver care. And we move away from currencies of appointments and direct interactions and into actual outcomes.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time. I really want to thank you, panelists, for what has been a really interesting and informative conversation. I want to thank everybody else for watching as well. And just everyone should be well. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.